The smell of stale beer and sawdust was the smell of failure. For 15 years, it had been the only smell Leo Mancuso knew. He'd swiped the same dirty rag across the same worn oak bar at the Rusty Nail, his movements as automatic as the town's slow decline. At 52, his hands, once capable of coaxing celestial music from a piece of wood, were now only good for pulling a tap and wiping up spills. In the back, gathering dust behind a case of cheap whiskey, was his legacy. A Martin D 28 guitar, its spruce top pale and lifeless, its strings rusted and slack. It was a corpse in a casket. He hadn't touched it since the night he walked off the stage at the Ryman Auditorium 20 years ago, the echo of booze still ringing in his ears. He hadn't just been a musician, he'd been the musician, Leo Mancuso and the Borderline. One platinum album, a string of hits that were anthems for a generation, and a voice that could break your heart or make you believe you could fly. Then came the second album, the sophomore slump, that wasn't just a slump, but a head-first dive off a cliff. The songs were derivative, the production overblown, and the critics, who had once crowned him, sharpened their knives. A hollow echo, one wrote. The well has run dry. The night at the Ryman was supposed to be a comeback. It was a disaster. He'd forgotten lyrics. His voice cracked on the high notes. And he'd ended the set early by smashing his prized Gibson into a monitor. The silence that followed was worse than the booze. It was the sound of 1,000 people feeling sorry for him. He'd retreated to his hometown, a fading coal mining town in Pennsylvania, and buried himself in the anonymity of tending bar. He watched his youth evaporate in the bottom of other people's shot glasses. He told himself he was content. He was a listener now, not a performer. He listened to the same tired stories of heartbreak and dead-end jobs, and he poured the whiskey that numbed them. One Tuesday, the stories stopped. A young man sat at the bar. He was maybe 25, with haunted eyes that seemed far too old for his face. He didn't order a drink. He just sat there, staring at the back bar. "We're not a library, kid," Leo said, not unkindly. The young man flinched. "Sorry, I'm looking for someone." Leo Mancuso. Leo's grip on the glass he was drying tightened. "He's not here." The guy at the motel said he tended bar here. Leo put the glass down and leaned on the bar, his voice dropping. "What do you want?" The young man's eyes welled with tears. "My mom is dying." Her name is Elena Vasquez. She was your biggest fan. She has all your records. The first one, she wore it out. The name hit Leo like a physical blow. Elena. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. A girl in the front row at a small club in Pittsburgh during the Borderline days. She'd had the most incredible, hopeful eyes. He'd signed her album. He'd signed a lot of albums, but he remembered her. "She's in hospice," the young man continued, his voice trembling. "She doesn't have much time. She talks about that night in Pittsburgh all the time. She says it was the best night of her life. She has the album. She plays it on an old record player, even though it skips. Her only wish is to hear the songs live again, to hear you play them. Just one more time." Leo stared at the young man, his son. The request was preposterous, impossible. He hadn't played in 20 years. His fingers were stiff, calloused from bar rags, not guitar strings. The very thought of touching a guitar filled him with a cold, familiar dread. "I can't," Leo whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry about your mum, son. Truly. But that man That musician, he died a long time ago." The young man, whose name was Matteo, just nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He slid a worn, folded piece of paper across the bar. It was a yellowed newspaper clipping, the review of that night in Pittsburgh. It was creased and soft from being handled countless times. He left it there and walked out. That night, after closing, Leo stood in the stockroom, staring at the Martins' dusty case. His hands were shaking. He hadn't felt fear like this since the night at the Ryman. He unlatched the clasps. The smell of old wood and rosin, a scent he'd once loved, now smelled like a graveyard. He lifted the guitar. It felt foreign, heavy. He strummed a single, open G chord. The sound was dull, the strings dead. It was the sound of a ghost. He tried to play the opening riff to "Lonesome Jane," his biggest hit. His fingers fumbled. They landed on the wrong frets. The muscle memory was gone, overwritten by years of neglect. He tried again. The same result. A wave of despair washed over him, so powerful he nearly threw the guitar against the wall. "See?" A voice inside him sneered. "It's gone. You're nothing." But then he looked at the newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Mancuso's Magic Transforms Humble Stage." He read the line Matteo's mother had surely read 1,000 times. When Mancuso sings, you don't just hear the notes, you feel the soul of every person who's ever been lonely, ever been in love, or ever dared to dream. He hadn't felt that soul in 20 years. He'd been a hollow echo, but Elena Vasquez had kept the echo alive in her heart. The next day, Leo went to a music store and bought a new set of strings. He spent an hour restringing the Martin, his thick fingers clumsy with the delicate task. When he was done, he tuned it, wincing at the harsh, bright sounds. Then he started again. He didn't try to play a song. He played scales, simple, boring, humiliating scales. His fingertips, soft from years of avoiding guitar, burned. They blistered and then they bled. He wrapped them in tape and kept going. Every night, after his shift, he'd sit in the stockroom, the only sound, the tentative, stumbling notes of a man learning to walk again. The first time he made it through the verse of Lonesome Jane without a mistake, he wept. It wasn't just relief, it was a homecoming. Each correct note was a brick laid on a path, leading him out of the darkness. A week later, he found Matteo sitting at the bar again. "I'll do it," Leo said. Matteo looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You will?" "For one night only. The Leo Mancuso Trio, featuring Leo Mancuso. Tell your mom. Tell her to save me a seat in the front row." The show was in the small, private dining room of the hospice. Leo didn't have a trio. He had himself, his Martin, and a rickety wooden chair. There were maybe 15 people there, a few nurses, some other patients in wheelchairs, and Matteo, who sat beside a frail woman in a bed that had been wheeled in. Her eyes were closed, her face pale and gaunt. An oxygen tank hissed softly beside her. Leo sat down. He looked at Elena. Her eyes fluttered open, and even in their diminished state, he saw them. The hopeful eyes from the front row in Pittsburgh, 50 pounds and a lifetime ago. She gave him the faintest smile. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't say a word. He just started to play. He started with Lonesome Jane. His fingers, still sore, found the fretboard with a certainty that surprised him. His voice, rusty and raw, croaked the first line. It wasn't the golden tenor of his youth. It was the voice of a man who had lived, who had failed, who had spent 20 years listening. It was rough, It was real, and it was honest. He played all the old songs, the ballads, the rockers. He played for Elena. He played to the hopeful light in her eyes, a light he realized he had helped kindle all those years ago, a light he had forgotten could exist. He played for the Mateos of the world, the sons and daughters who inherited the hopes of their parents. And somewhere in the second verse of the third song, he stopped playing for anyone else and started playing for himself. He wasn't the hollow echo anymore. He was the source. The music wasn't a memory. It was a living, breathing thing. When he finished the last song, a quiet version of a B-side called Coming Home, silence filled the room. But it wasn't the awful silence of the Ryman. It was a sacred silence filled with something profound. Mateo was crying silently, his head bowed. Leo looked at Elena. A single tear had escaped the corner of her eye and was tracing a path down her temple, disappearing into her grey hair. A peaceful, beautiful smile was on her lips. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't asleep. Leo carefully placed the guitar on its stand. He walked over to the bed and gently took her hand. It was cool. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. He didn't feel sadness. He felt an overwhelming, humbling gratitude. He had given her her wish, but in giving it, she had given him back his life. He didn't go back to the Rusty Nail. A few weeks later, a small music venue in a neighboring town, a place that hosted open mic nights, had a new act. A grey-haired man with kind, sad eyes and a voice that sounded like forgiveness walked onto their tiny stage with a Martin D28. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the 20 or so people nursing their beers. "My name is Leo," he said. "I'm going to play a few songs. This first one is for a woman named Elena. She taught me that you're never too old to come home." And Leo Mancuso, who had died on a stage in Nashville, began to rise again, one honest note at a time. He wasn't the star he once was. He was something better. He was himself. And for the first time in 20 years, that was finally enough. Moral: it is never too late to come home to yourself. True redemption isn't about reclaiming who you were, but embracing who you've become.